Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of AlixTalks. I always love doing these talks, but I'm particularly excited about today's discussion. We have a wonderful guest with us today, Angela Williams, President and CEO of United Way, obviously a dearly loved and much admired nonprofit, known very well to our American audience, but maybe not as well known to our international audience. Serves about 48 million people every year in 37 countries, an extraordinary nonprofit, the largest privately funded nonprofit in the United States, and of course, under Angela's leadership, doing amazing work every single day. I had the good fortune of meeting Angela a few years ago when we were both attending the same conference, and we met at a large lunch, and I was desperately trying to find a seat. And luckily there was a spare seat and I rushed for it and found myself sitting next to Angela. And that started a wonderful discussion and then a wonderful relationship. Angela said, gosh, I must rush to my panel, and off she went. And I thought, gosh, I'm going to be late for my panel too. And then we found we were on the same panel and in fact sitting next to each other, and the conversation has continued ever since. So I'm so delighted, Angela, that you're with us today. So delighted that we can continue our conversation. We have so much to speak about, don't we?
Thank you, Simon. Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Well, maybe we can start, just for those that don't know United Way as well as others, just a few minutes on United Way, the purpose and the scope of the activities.
Thank you. And thank you for introducing United Way. I'm the CEO of United Way Worldwide. We are a 138-year-old organization. Imagine that. 138 years in multiple countries around the world, focusing on youth opportunity, healthy communities. We think about community resilience and financial stability. What we want to do is mobilize the caring power of communities. And we do that through our partnerships, not only with corporations that give money to us through their employees. We do that through volunteers. We do that through partnering with nearly 29,000 other nonprofits and giving money to them to really activate people in communities. There's so many needs, as you can imagine.
And as I've sort of understood more about your remarkable life, let alone remarkable career, community seems to have been right at the root of it, your commitment to community. Can you just tell us a little bit about your journey, maybe even from your early years?
Yes, I do have a commitment to communities, and so that's why I feel like at this moment in time, I am in the right place, and I am actually fulfilling my purpose in life. So I was born to parents that were civil rights activists. My dad was pastor of a Baptist church in South Carolina, worked alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., headed up one of the local chapters of the NAACP, worked with Thurgood Marshall Jr., and so even as a child, you hear this language about wanting to make sure that everyone had equal rights and wanting to integrate society and giving everybody an opportunity to thrive. And then my dad and mom made the decision that he would join the Navy, and he was I believe the third Black chaplain in the history of the United States Navy. So again, a trailblazer. So growing up on military bases throughout my own childhood, which then led me to join the military. And I was a lawyer in the Air Force, active duty, and thoroughly enjoyed that. But my entire professional life is this whole notion of community and service.
Extraordinary. And I understand that there was a moment a little earlier, maybe in your mid to late teens, where you thought you might be a professional pianist or a professional violinist, that you had to make a decision as to which way you went?
Well, let's go back to when I was 6 years old. So ask 6-year-old Angela, what did she want to do when she grew up? I wanted to be president. I wanted to be...
It's not too late.
But wait a second. I wanted to be a nun and a musician.
Wow.
And so I've done all three. I'm president of United Way Worldwide, right? So I've achieved that. I said a nun because when I was a kid, there was this show called The Flying Nun with Sally Fields, and that was my only picture of a woman in ministry. Fast forward, I have my Master's of Divinity and I'm an ordained Baptist minister, so I checked that box. And music. I started my first instrument when I was 6 years old and eventually took on learning tons of different instruments, but piano and violin were my two performance instruments. And my senior year in high school, I had to decide, did I want to have a career as a musician or did I want to be a lawyer? Because I also wanted to be a lawyer at 6 as well. So, I just
Had a lot going
dreamed
on.
big. And I had auditioned at the Kennedy Center for their orchestra to do a piano concerto. I was a finalist but did not win. And I thought, wow, I do want to be a lawyer. So I had to make the decision that I wasn't going to go to conservatory, music conservatory, but instead follow traditional college and then on to law school. That was a pivotal moment for a high school student to make that decision.
Yeah, but music stayed a part of your life, so...
Music is an incredible way and form of communicating that crosses boundaries, that crosses languages, and it speaks to the soul and the spirit.
So agree with that. And of course, your reference to wanting to be a nun, I hadn't realized this in our earlier conversations. My mother wanted to be a nun, but luckily my father talked her out of it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
But I'm sure your mom is a wonderfully spirited woman.
She certainly is. And music as well, in my own little journey, not that I'm a musician in any way, but just as I've observed music really having an impact on not just the development of children, but also as a vehicle to affect change. It's really important, isn't it?
Well, you know what I love about music and the arts in general is it allows people to express their creativity and to innovate, and which actually ties into my book when I talk about
Yes.
Neuroflexibility. And a lot of us sometimes get stuck in this rigidity of this doesn't make sense, but I'm going to apply a solution that I've always used to fix a problem. And with music and the arts, you're dreaming and thinking of something that's completely different and new.
And it's a universal language, isn't it?
It sure is.
It brings people
Yes.
together. Now, we're going to get onto your book. Let's talk about your book. So this is going to be published in the next couple of weeks.
Yes.
Navigating the Age of Chaos. I've been reading it. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you.
And this is the moment to try and make sense of all of these different things that are going on that don't seem to make sense. But this book sets out a way of thinking about it. So just tell me, why this book and why now?
Well, I'm actually grateful to my two co-authors, Jamae Cassio and Bob Johansson, both of them with the Institute for the Future. And as futurists, they are trained to look at signals that are currently happening around us to say what is happening and going to happen in the future. And creating this way of thinking and a mindset is incredibly invaluable. Now, Bob, for a long time, used to focus and talk on the VUCA world, and that is living in a world that's volatile, uncertain, chaotic, and ambiguous. Fast forward to leading up into the pandemic, Jamae saw that that framework for leadership wasn't answering the questions and how we in the world found ourselves at that moment with COVID. And he came up with this framework called BANI, that acknowledging that we're living in a brittle, anxious, nonlinear, incomprehensible world, but coming up with the positive BANI of how do you lead and work through and live within a new framework. And so they invited me as the president and CEO of United Way Worldwide to participate in this because in my line of work in health and human services, we have real life examples of touching people, working alongside our neighbors that are experiencing this chaotic world day in and day out.
Yeah. And Bob is a futurist?
Yes.
Yeah, so his whole career, I guess, has been trying to anticipate things that aren't just easily extrapolated from past events.
That's right. That's right.
When I was looking at the book, I mean, a few things caught my eye. This whole sense of, you mentioned non-linear thinking, how actually in this uncertain world, and probably generative AI is an example of it, people knew that machine learning was a thing and AI has been an expression for some time, but all of a sudden, ChatGPT explodes
Yes.
in the world, and we're wondering what the heck's going to mean for every person, every job, every company, every industry, every country. And so as you explored this framework, that I think you call it the BANI framework, don't you?
Yes.
As you explored this framework, how did you think about how leaders of any organizations or companies or countries, how do they think about anticipating things where the old tools of planning and visioning are no longer working? How do they think about this uncertainty and plan through it?
Thank you. That's a great observation, because when you think about the moment that we find ourselves in, the world is speeding up. Things are happening so quickly. And with technology, and as you said, with Gen AI and the tools, and wait till we get to quantum computing and all that that entails, life as we know it currently is going to be, and is even now, drastically different. You mentioned nonlinearity. As human beings, we're looking for cause and effect. We are looking for, there's a problem, then there's a solution, and the solution is based on my experiences, what I've done in the past. And so I will literally, as a human being, want to apply what I know, which is that square peg, and put it in this round hole called chaos, and then feel really anxious about this isn't working. And so when we think about nonlinearity, the positive way of leading through it is neuroflexibility. And that's where you bring in your technology and understanding that there are new ways of exploring and doing things that I would have never thought of. And so solutions that I've used in the past don't work. Why don't I then bring in others to help me creatively thinking about what to do? Let me give you a quick example. It's about using, you can even use systems that currently exist, but use them differently. And in fact, I want to give you two different examples. The first example I'll give you, that's a very simple one, and both are related to COVID. And this is in a small community in Australia. But in the United States, we have these little boxes that are on corners that you can put in a book. And
I've seen them.
And then you can go just grab a book, or you can put another book in. So during COVID, when people were in lockdown, they were not comfortable leaving their homes or leaving their neighborhoods. So United Way said, why don't we put canned food and other food in those little boxes? And so that was a way of neighbors helping neighbors, but using an existing system. Fast forward now, they're operating 9 food pantries. Let me give you one that's closer to home with the Mayo Clinic. Forever doctors would say, if you have an illness, where do you need to go? To my office. I need to physically see you, sit in front of you, and diagnose your illness and prescribe a solution. Well, during COVID, what happened? Well, we can use the telephone. We can use other means, whether it's Zoom help or other mechanisms, so I can see you and diagnose and prescribe without you actually physically being with me. And so Mayo Clinic, for example, was one of many health systems that immediately pivoted to being able to talk to your doctor via your phone or other device. So that's the neuroflexibility. That's the how can we embrace technology to do something new so that humanity can continue to function.
I love the Mayo Clinic example. I've had the privilege of being able to spend some time there. And what I love about their approach, which I've not seen anywhere else, is they want to treat the whole person.
Yes.
So they'll say, you might come in with a pain in your knee or something, but actually let's look at what's caused that in the first place. And this whole sense of treating the whole person,
Yes.
which sort of resonates with what I also picked up in your book about the sense of it's not just about the facts, about the content, it's about the context. How are communities behaving? Are they healthy? If they're not healthy, what can you do as an intervention to improve the quality of community life? And this whole sense of seeing the whole person in a Mayo Clinic sense, but seeing the whole community.
That's right.
In a BANI sense. And that also seems to chime with your other parallel life, which is the life of your calling, as an
Yes.
ordained minister. And I loved it when we sat waiting for our panel to start a few years ago at that conference, where I said, well, what is your ministry? And you said, I'm a marketplace minister.
You remember that?
I do remember
Oh my
it.
goodness.
Yeah, so just talk a little bit about that.
So I will tell you, it's interesting being a lawyer. And again, lawyers, like, there's a solution. You see every angle and you come up with an answer or perspective. And, but growing up in a household where my father was a Navy chaplain and going to church and having my own personal religious experience, I will tell you, it was actually a moment where I had gone on a church trip to Israel. And my religion is Christianity, and being in Israel and walking the footsteps of Jesus and just having this spiritual moment. And if you've not ever been to Israel, it's just it's special and other places as well in the Middle East, because you think old here in the U.S., but then you go to the Middle East and then you really see old. I thought, wow, I feel a calling to do even more. Came back, went to work for Senator Ted Kennedy on his staff, on the Senate Judiciary Committee staff. And my pastor has said in order to be ordained as a minister, of course, you have to have a seminary degree. And so I went to Senator Kennedy and said, Senator, I've been called into ministry, but I'm still going to work here for you as your special person on criminal law in the Senate Judiciary Committee. And I said, but I want to leave the Senate early on Fridays to go to a weekend program. And he said, go for it. So he was really gracious. So seminary's 3 years. I went in, and I'm diverting just a little bit. I went in very arrogantly and said, well, I graduated from law school, so clearly seminary is a piece of cake. And I'm here to tell you it was harder than law school. When you get to the Greek, the Hebrew, the Old Testament, the New Testament, and everything else in between, talking about context historically. But after I graduated, I had to go before a council in Washington, D.C. of PhD theologians, and to test, am I ready to be ordained, and asking me questions. I had to submit a paper in advance. And one of the questions they asked me was, what is your calling? And how have you been called to the ministry? And I said, I have been called to marketplace ministry. And they said, well, tell us more. And I said, well, I've been a lawyer for a long time. And I asked God, am I supposed to stop being a lawyer? He said, no, I made you to be a lawyer. You remember, you're going to be a nun, you're going to be a president. And so a lawyer, musician. So I said, I'm called to marketplace ministry. And they said, so what does that mean? I said, I will engage with people whose shadows will never darken the doors of a church. And they sent me out and said, never heard of that. They wrestled with it for a while, because I was also a former federal prosecutor with the Department of Justice. And then they were like, wow, okay, she's putting people in jail, and then now she wants to pray for them. And that's how Senator Kennedy used to introduce me. He said, this is Angela. She puts them in jail in the morning, she prays for them at night. But it was that moment where I felt like my purpose is to be all of who I am, my spirituality, and how I can relate to others in my job. And now, being head of United Way Worldwide, where we have about 45,000 corporate partners, and many of the global companies that who have been around for more than 100 years have been our partners for that same amount of time. Working with Lilly, for example, I was just in Indianapolis, and one of their missions is, of course, to help people with their medications. So I connected the dot one in Australia, where they give us money to fund a diabetes nonprofit that works globally, and they're committed to that. Yet last year, Lilly's employees raised $15 million for hundreds of local United Ways to disperse in their communities. And so again, this is marketplace ministry in action.
And what I love about it is you seem to run both elements of your life in this way completely in parallel with each other. It's not that you're spending 5 minutes on this side and 5 minutes on the other. They're both coexisting.
That was a journey, though. that was a journey to get to that. Because even though I said out of my mouth, I'm the lawyer, but also marketplace ministry, when I left Senator Kennedy's office, I went to work for a law firm. And one day I was talking to one of the partners, and he said, I was talking about billable hours. That's the thing in law firms and consulting world as well. And I was like, I really need to meet my mark. And it seems like some of the bigger cases are going to the guy down the hall, and he hasn't had as much federal jury experience and trial experience as I have. I don't understand it. I'm frustrated. And he stopped me and said, Angela, how many bios and resumes do you have? And I stopped and I thought, okay, that's not a relevant question. But I answered it and I said, I have two. And he said, what are they? I said, well, I have my minister bio and I have my lawyer bio. And he said, oh, are you two people? Do you have a psychological break going on? And I said, what are you talking about? No. He said, well, if you're really one person, why do you have two bios? And I said, well, the corporate companies that we provide support to, they don't want to know I'm a minister. He said, but of course they do. He said, people want to work with people that they relate to and are their authentic selves. He said, you are not being authentic. Boy, I got upset. Long story short, he said, I'm going to pay for you to go to these sessions that talk about how do you become your authentic self. And so now I am who I am wherever I am. And so if you ever see me preaching on the pulpit, I'm talking the same way that I'm talking to you right now.
And it was so profoundly obvious to me from our very first meeting that it was one life and one narrative.
Yes.
And I found myself sitting, waiting for the panel to start, asking you all sorts of spiritual questions that were going around my mind. And you so elegantly didn't answer them. You just asked me questions and led me to try and answer them myself. It was so elegantly done.
Well, I tell you, thank you. And I want to give a shout out to a good friend of mine, Marcy Albaher, who wrote a book that was based on me called One Person, Multiple Careers. And what happened, I was speaking at a women's legal conference, and I heard a lot of whispering in the audience before I was coming on stage and paper turning. And I stopped and grabbed the brochure to say, what's going on? And I saw that my EA had sent my minister bio instead of my lawyer bio to this women's legal conference. So I had to make a joke of it when I came on stage. I said, I'm so glad I'm here. Welcome, ladies, to this women's legal conference, great conference. And yes, I want you to know I am a lawyer, and yes, I am a minister, but I'm here on stage today to talk about law. However, if anybody wants prayer, I'll meet you after the conference. Well, Marcy was a freelance reporter for the New York Times, and she pitched this story to the New York Times as a column that took off for a number of years.
Wow.
Of people like me that have multiple careers.
It's amazing. And I think for all of us, we're all trying to manage, just because our career is important doesn't mean that our family isn't important, doesn't mean that something else is important. So we can't lead 2 or 3 or 4 lives. We have to lead one life. And
That's
so
right.
all the time, I think we're all asking, how do we be our authentic selves and lead our whole life as best as we can, which has to include all parts, doesn't it?
But it's work, Simon.
It is, but you're a fantastic example of how you've done that.
Let's talk to my husband.
Who is also an ordained minister.
He's also an ordained minister, and he brings the wonderful balance to me, because you have to have the people, your friends and your family, that say, hey, I know you, and you need to do better at this, or they point out your blind spot. And that's important as a leader too, to have people around you that point out the blind spots. And then when you find yourselves in a chaotic situation, to help you navigate through that.
Right. And in fact, on that point, just coming back to this book, I think what also you so elegantly sort of address and then navigate is how, where there are so few certainties, how you develop a point of view, have a plan for the short term and a strategy for the long term. And partly based on what you hope is the case, but also to remain flexible and pivot.
That's right.
And one of the things I just wanted to ask you about, you talk in the book about having, the ability to make ethical and moral judgments in a business setting as one's navigating through. And I forget the exact phrase you used, but I think stanchions to hold the rubber bands of boundaries for ethics and morals. I probably haven't got the expression exactly right, but that there are boundaries, but they can move depending on circumstance. Just talk a little bit about that, how you think about, you know, observing ethics and morals in an environment that's so uncertain and changing so quickly.
I think one of the things that each person has to be willing to articulate is what are they rooted and grounded in when it comes to their values? And what are the lines that they are not willing to cross? And I heard someone say the other day is when you do something and it's discovered, would your mother be okay with it? And I thought that's an even simpler way of putting it, you know, taking you back to childhood. And also, just to mention, I'm serving on the Open AI Ethics Council that's co-chaired by Sam Altman and John Hope Bryant.
Right.
And so as a leader, when we think about even what technologies or what are we introducing into the workforce and how does that impact workers and how does it potentially even replace workers, then as a leader, what are the value systems that you're going to have in place as you think through a human-centric and workforce-first perspective? To me, that's a very complex set of ways of thinking about our organizations. And that's every sector where we're going to have to think about the implications. And then when I think about the workforce, I think about young people. I think about the next generation. What are we training them to do and how to show up? What are we saying to the younger generations of what their future will hold and how can they be prepared to live a good life and to thrive? And for those of us that are currently in leadership position, what are we doing and what decisions and choices are we making right now? And what are those guideposts of values that ensure that we have and are preserving a world that everyone wants to live in and be a part of? And then finally, I would say, recognizing that there is no plan B for this planet, what are we doing individually and collectively to get to the right thing and the right place? And I know people are listening now and thinking, well, look at the world today. Just look at where we find ourselves today. The one thing I would say is that even in looking to the future, we recognize that what is old and is new again, that history does tend to repeat itself. And we have seen the rise and fall of regimes. We have seen the bendability, the elasticity, the being around as humans and the innovation. And so here we are, and this too shall pass. There will be something else new. But as long as we stay rooted and grounded in our values, in loving our neighbors as we love ourselves, if we just stick with that one value, which is a tough commandment, I think we can do better, and we will do better.
And I noticed in your book as well, you refer several times to Viktor Frankl. And of course, Viktor Frankl, you know, wrote this amazing book, Man's Search for Meaning, on the back of having been interned in a Nazi concentration camp.
Yes.
And, you know, surviving it.
Yes.
Because he was a doctor and therefore his skills were needed. And then, of course, developed this whole theory of logotherapy around, you know, the need for meaning in our lives. And is that part of what you're saying here, that actually purpose and meaning are critical in any strategy despite all the uncertainty?
I absolutely believe that's the case. And all of us have to do the work as leaders to understand that your company could be here today and gone tomorrow. There could be a crisis, an economic crisis or a political crisis or upheaval with a war that could happen, but that should not crush you. Because if you have meaning and purpose, then you figure out how to be bendable. How do you become inclusive? How are you neurally flexible? And how are you attentive and not anxious? And so, yes, it starts with us individually as leaders, and then we pass that on as leaders to those that are around us. And certainly how we show up in our choices and actions will bear out whether or not we have done the work.
I want to come back in a minute to advice that you might have for all of us in terms of leadership and how to navigate that. But just maybe one more thing about the book. This profound uncertainty that pervades everything at the moment, which creates anxiety, as you've just mentioned. One of the things which, as you know, we do at AlixPartners, a disruption index report every year. We've now been doing it for 8 years or so, and we interview, I think, 3,200 business leaders around the world, and we ask them all sorts of questions about what they're seeing, what they're worrying about, where they see the opportunity, where they see the challenge. And one of the things that I've noticed, because we now have some really good longitudinal data, is just the anxiety of leaders is going up and up and up, and anxiety in certain dimensions. So no surprise, of course, to anybody that supply chain is top of everybody's worry list at the moment. I think in the last disruption index, the anxiety around supply chain had gone up by 45 percentage points. But actually, the CEOs worrying about losing their jobs had gone up by about 50%. Yes. So what I somewhat joked with my colleagues that we should start calling it the anxiety index rather than the disruption index. But because of the client work we do, we have this privilege of a front row seat, and as our clients try and maximize the opportunities, mitigate the challenges. But what I really resonated with me as I read your book was this ambient uncertainty, and therefore anxiety is permeating everything. So even more important to your point about having a clear sense of our values, a clear sense of purpose to push through that.
That's right. Because
we can't control a whole bunch of things, but we can control our response to them.
Yes.
And so the question I'd like to ask you, Angela, on this topic is, for all of us, and on today's call and beyond, what advice would you give as a leader? I mean, you've led in your ministry, you've led in government, you've led in the YMCA, you're now leading in United Way. What advice would you give in terms of how to lead during these BANI times?
I am actually going to give you a mixture of my real and spiritual aspects to answer that, in the sense of anxiety is fear, and it has physical implications for us and mental implications when we give in to anxiety and fear. It's because as humans, we always want to control everything. But the spiritual answer that I always say is that fear is nothing more than false evidence appearing real.
False evidence appearing real. Wow, I've never heard that before.
So, as leaders, we can start what we call scenario planning. Right. And, well, this could happen, or if I make this decision, this can happen. Now, obviously, risk analysis and all of that is important, but you're making up scenarios that aren't real. And then if you give into your worst case scenario, your anxiety levels go up. The antidote to that is, one, being attentive to your feelings, two, recognizing that this is not reality because it's a story that you've made up as a possibility that may or may not ever come to fruition. And so then focus on, how do I not freeze, but instead keep moving forward?
I do agree, just from my own experience, not just in our firm, but with our clients. I think that the ambiguity can paralyze people, that actually people can say, well, it could go in so many different directions. And one danger is that people then wait to get better information, but it's almost the worst thing they can do.
Yes, it can be too late.
They have to decide on a direction of travel and move to action, and then pivot, which I guess is your flexibility
And that's the flexibility
point.
Piece, right?
Your flexibility.
Yes.
And it's not a new skill, but it's certainly a skill that everybody's having to use more, isn't it?
Yes.
They're actually doing it nearly right, but doing it now.
Yes.
And then you can course correct as you go. One of the other things that came out of a disruption survey, by the way, was over 40% of CEOs felt they didn't have the right skills in their executive team to tackle all of the issues that they're dealing with. Now, clearly, they better move on that pretty quickly.
Yes.
But this whole sense of the old routines and the old rules don't work anymore.
That's right. That's right. And so also working with people that recognize that they have to be flexible and they can't be stuck in the fear. And I go back to what I said at the beginning, and that is the world is moving so rapidly. And we have technology that's impacting and influencing us daily. And that willingness to say, I may not have all of the right answers, but I have to keep going. Because if I don't and I stop, we'll lose market share, we'll lose ground, we'll lose relevance, etc. And someone else will step into your place. And so there's this moment in time where we will have to, and this goes to the positive of incomprehensibility, is bringing in inclusivity and bringing in people that may not look like us, that may not think like us, that may not have the same background and experience, but there's wisdom in the counsel of many. And certainly the different perspectives and skill sets can help move us forward in this chaotic world and in new and unique ways that we have never thought of.
Right. And just to remind ourselves as to what BANI stands for. So it's brittle.
Yes. Anxious. Nonlinear.
Nonlinear.
And incomprehensible.
And incomprehensible. And so in that BANI world, the old tools don't work, do they?
No. So where you find yourself looking at brittle systems, think about how they can become bendable. When you're living in a world where there's high anxiety, again, thinking about how do you practice acceptance and are attentive to your circumstances and those around you. When things are nonlinear, in other words, there has to be a cause and effect, and yet there isn't, then how do you behave in a way that's neuroflexible? And that's the innovative and experimenting with things that are new. And then in where this world is just incomprehensible, like, I've never seen this before. I never thought I don't know where how this happened. Oh my gosh, that whole incomprehensible, and I can't wrap my mind around it. That's where you bring in the inclusivity of others with thoughts and experiences that are different from yours. And the last thing I would say that at United Way, what we recently did, and because I started my leadership there tenure during COVID, and having worked with Bob Johansson in particular, my co-author, for a long time, and I said, we need to create a curriculum for nonprofit leaders, our next generation leaders, to think as futurists now, to understand how to lead in this chaotic world now, so that when they replace us, they already have the tools and are equipped to operate in this BANI world.
That's a great bit of advice. Well, look, I know I can see that there's a bunch of questions coming in from our audience. Would you mind if we pivoted to a couple of questions online? Let's just, let's take the first one. So the question is, where does Angela get the energy to manage such transformation? And where did you get your inspiration?
I have to go back to my parents, who used to say to me as a kid, where do you get this energy from? So I was born with it. And my husband says that we are the tortoise and the hare. And he will tell you, Angela is always in fifth gear. And he says, I'm at third gear at best. So opposites do attract and work well together. And I really think it's this, the inspiration again is my passion for my purpose in life. And I talk a lot when I'm on stage about the dash.
The dash.
Yes, and the dash is what is on your tombstone between the date that you were born and the date that you die. And what is in your dash? What does your dash represent? What is your legacy? What have you done to help others and make this world a better place. And I am driven by my dash.
I love that. I remember about 30 years ago, I went on a retreat with Stephen Covey, who was a thing at the time. And we had a week with him on the mountainside in Utah. And one of the exercises he had us do was writing our obituaries.
Oh.
And then he'd say, you know, what we hoped our obituaries would say as and when our time ran out. And then, of course, the takeaway was, so you now have to live the life to create that,
Yes.
that obituary, which I love the dash. Next question. I'm currently working with universities in managing the chaos and disruption academia is facing regarding AI. Is there any advice to offer in an environment distinctly different in many ways from private companies?
What I think is great with universities is how universities can take the disruption of AI and technology and help students and learners embrace it in a way that is productive, and how universities can also think about pathways for people in terms of their careers and their professional growths, and also think about how do we invest now using AI and its disruption to be able to shape societies in a way that is helpful, healthy, and ensures the well-being of all.
It's such a great question. I have the privilege of sitting on the board of a college, John Jay College, which it turns out to be the most diverse college in the United States, and does extraordinary work every day. The passion of the academics, the purpose of the programming. But what I've learned from the privilege of being on that group is that leadership is just as important in academic and non-profit institutions as it is in the business world, where many of our audience, and of course I spend most of my time, but actually leadership is the most important thing, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Next question. Being a leader can be very lonely and people expect you to have all the answers. How do you build yourself up when you start to question your ability to move forward with all the uncertainty?
I do a lot of praying, honestly. And then though, and thank you for the question, it comes back to having people with different skill sets and backgrounds that you bounce ideas off of and say, hey, I'm thinking about this. Does this make sense? And different generations, I think that intergenerational conversation and approach is so important. The younger folks have a lens and perspective that's different than mine, and I value it. One of the things that I think is important for us also to remember, a lot of times leaders will think that difference means deficiency. And so just because your background experience and way that you approach things is different, then it's deficient because it's not the way that I would do it. And that's not true.
Right.
So as a leader, it's important to just really be able to find a circle of people that you can talk to that are different than you and listen.
Yes. And the, mentorship, of course, is important for all of us. And of course, what we typically think about in mentorship is somebody that's more experienced than us and what we can learn from them. But actually, increasingly, I find, probably because I'm getting so old, that some of the best mentorship comes from people that are younger than me.
Yes.
And they do, they have a different experience.
Yes.
Their generation maybe has a different set of issues on their mind. And actually, the mentorship that comes from people that are earlier in their journey turns out to be just as important and often impactful as those that are further along.
I agree. And just always willing to be a learner, a continuous learner is key.
Yeah, and the loneliness point, how do you deal with that? Do you have, obviously a loving and supportive family, but do you have your sort of speed dial list of people that you call?
Yes.
And so would you recommend that people have that sort of phone a friend list?
That's right. And also sometimes, depending on what's happening, you may find yourself in a group of people that are experiencing something at the exact same time and being able to talk to each other about it and just rooting each other on and saying, hang in there, it's going to be all right.
Yeah. Ooh, last question. through time, though we have lots of other questions, but we have time for one more. Angela, what do you think defines a great leader?
What defines a great leader is someone that doesn't always take themselves seriously and is able to laugh at themselves. Someone who is a continuous learner. Someone who obviously is rooted and grounded in their values. Someone who's willing to do the work for themselves. Now, do I like to think that I'm perfect? Yeah. Am I? Absolutely not. And what are my blind spots that I need to work on? I have a lot of faults. And I try to do the work. And have others that you can talk to that say, Angela, okay, you have this fault or way of thinking or stinking thinking, but let's talk through this. Where did this mindset and these behaviors come from? Where do they stem from? Are they cultural? Are they familial? Are they the result of an experience that you had? And then how do you uncouple yourself from that mindset and behavior that is not healthy or helpful, and not bind you, but shift so that you're operating in a new and different way. So this notion of continual improvement as a human being relating to other human beings.
So flexibility but growth.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think you're emblematic of a wonderful leader, as well as a wonderful human being. I'm
As
so
are you.
grateful for you coming and being in this conversation today and our ongoing relationship. Thank you so much. I admire enormously everything you've done and what you continue to do. And I hope that we can do another one of these
Thank
again.
you,
It's been so
Simon.
much fun. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you everybody for joining us today.